Notice how Easter begins. All four Gospels agree that it starts very early in the day. In John's account, we're told that Mary Magdalene starts her journey to the tomb while it is still dark. When Jesus died, John tells us a cloud covered up the sun so that it became like night in the middle of the day. Come Easter Sunday morning, the third day, this layer of shadows remains perhaps as thick and heavy as the grief of Jesus' friends. Luke, on the other hand, observes that when the women set out toward the tomb very early in the morning, it's already dawn. It's a small difference, perhaps, but in scanning the details of the Easter accounts and the perspective each author offers, so that we can begin to fathom what's happening here, it's worth noting every hint of hope the gospel writers want us to find. Still, we know the women did not go to the tomb looking for hope. They weren't expecting that. They were simply searching for a place to grieve. That and a chance to anoint the lifeless body of Jesus, to wrap his bruised frame in aloes and linens, to bathe his tortured flesh with their tears, and enfold him softly in their prayers. Their intention is to mourn his death and also to honor his life. They thought they would be left to do it alone. But God, it turns out, has something else in mind. And in Luke's gospel, even the sky blushes in anticipation of what they are about to discover. It's quite a scene they find. The stone rolled, the tomb empty, the body gone. And there are people waiting there for them, radiant figures in dazzling clothes. Not just one angel, as in other gospels, but two, an excess to amaze them. The women bow to shield themselves and their eyes from their brightness. In the first line of her great poem, Catholic, Fanny Howe asks, "What can you do after Easter? What do we do when the preparation is over? We've been waiting for Easter and here it is. But what can we see with all that light in our eyes?" A friend of mine wrote that the year following her greatest grief was filled with stunning skies. After she gave birth to premature twins who did not survive a single day, she saw violet sunsets and rosy dawns, navy storm clouds and lavender evenings, buttercream wisps and pewter fogs. She spent hours that year craning her eyes up, tilting her head back to take in the expansive view. Had I never looked up before, she wondered? Had I never noticed the shifting seasons in the stars? Her heart and her whole world had been ripped open by death and loss, but in the midst of her anguish, her eyes absorbed a wild palette of horizons and the beauty of purple skies. Bruised skies, she called them. Her own grief painted large, slashing rains, watercolor sunsets bleeding into night. And then one morning, a softening, a pale peach sunrise so breathless and perfect it might be the last on earth. And then it wasn't. The day rose and set again, another sunset, another sunrise. Life keeps on going. It carries on. Life lives everlastingly, we're told. Easter rises with the invitation to look past death in all its guises in order to find, as another poet puts it, the thing that's deeper, the gold-flecked vein of life running through the gray stone of loss. Terrible things happen. Sometimes they happen to us. It's often true that we don't have a choice about that, but we do have the power to notice. After a year of watching the sky, my friend said, "Seeing can be enough to save a life." Why do you look for the living among the dead? The figures in dazzling dress asked the women beside the empty tomb. He is not here. He is risen. So we go with them to look for life. If Easter tells us there is no such thing as a dead end, we keep watch for signs of resurrection. We look for the hope that Easter shows us is always dawning. We scan the horizon so that we won't miss the pale peach glow of a brand new day and another chance to live it fully. We notice beginnings, opening our eyes, our minds, our hearts, our lives to every good and life-giving possibility, rising up in our imaginations, in our lives around us, and for the sake of the world. We pay attention to new life wherever it's being born. We watch it grow. We draw near so that we might participate in its growth, aligning our energies and our efforts, our work and our prayers to its unfolding. We also rest our lives and all of our hope on God's profound assurance that in the end, love and justice will have the final word. Love and justice, God's jubilee and joy, the final word. Other things are having a say in the meantime. Violence and war, greed, injustice, brutality. God knows, and we see how they are having a day of it. And the way of these times seems to be that for all of our steps forward in building a better, more loving world, we also take steps backwards. If that's all we see, it's no wonder we fall into despair. But the Gospels, all of them, tell us that Christ is risen, which means that even a brutal death could not keep him down or hold him back. He is risen, and he has gone ahead of us into the future. The Easter promise stands. A new irrevocable era has dawned, and we know where it's headed. So Easter gives us the courage to lift our heads and to tilt them back to take in a more expansive view, a larger vision, a longer view. We remember what we've been told about the arc of the moral universe, how it's long, but how it bends towards justice. We live now as if that's true, and we hang our weight on bending it in that direction. We turn our vigil into vigilance. We also remember that we ourselves are a resurrection in progress. We are always being changed. We are still becoming. The last 2 years have changed us as a congregation. Since last summer, we've been intentional in reflecting on how that's true for us. Now and in the coming days, we will be talking about that even more, naming dreams and making plans based on priorities we have discerned for our future, for learning and service, care and communication, new ways for all of us, children, youth, adults of every age, to be formed in faith, to be actively engaged in justice making, to share with others the good news of our life together and the life we know in God, and to continue to build the beloved community that serves as a witness of God's love and light in the world. A year and a half ago, following the murder of George Floyd, 89 people in our congregation signed up to participate in a 6-week series to examine our white privilege. Before and after that time, several members of our congregation have become actively engaged in anti-racism work through the NAACP, the Boulder County chapter our congregation helped to form. More recently, we have launched a racial justice ministry so that we can keep this concern front and center as we continue to learn and listen. Some of our members are planning for us a pilgrimage to sites on the Civil Rights Trail, especially to Montgomery, Alabama, so that we can draw near to the good and life-giving work of Bryan Stevenson, a lawyer known for his Equal Justice Initiative and his work with Black men on death row. You may remember his book, Just Mercy, and the movie, too. Since then, his work has unfolded into establishing the Legacy Museum and the National Memorial for Peace and Justice, places of remembrance and sober reflection, which shine the bright light of truth on our country's long, long history of racial terror, with the hope that we will commit ourselves to a future of racial equality and just treatment for all people. Stevenson's project has identified and visited hundreds of lynching sites in 12 states. Stories of what happened to people at each location and soil from the ground in each place has been collected and brought to the museum. Public markers are being erected in those sites in an effort to reshape our cultural landscape with memorials that reveal hard truths about our history. Imagine all the witnesses making their way to visit these sites. The life stories of people in their minds, the empty jars in their hands. Bryan Stevenson remembers one such witness, a Black woman who went out to collect soil in a remote location. Early in the morning, she found the place she was seeking beside a narrow dirt road in the middle of nowhere. Kneeling on the ground, she took out her jar and began to dig up the ground. Just as she started, a pickup truck drove by. A large white man stared out at her from the cab. A few feet down the road, the truck slowed, stopped, turned around, and came back. The man parked his truck and walked over. "What are you doing?" he asked. Afraid now, she considered telling him that she was gathering dirt for her garden, but something made her change her mind. She told him the truth. "I'm digging up this soil here because this is where a Black man was lynched in 1937. I'm here to remember him and to honor his life." Lying on the ground near the woman was a printed report. "Does that paper talk about what happened? Can I read it?" He did. And then he asked, "Excuse me, ma'am, would it be all right if I helped you?" He got down on his knees next to her. She offered him a garden tool. He declined. "I'll just use my hands." As he started to dig the earth, his hands turned black from the soil. There was something about the effort and intensity with which he was digging that touched the woman, and a tear rolled down her face. He saw it and said, "I'm so sorry. I'm upsetting you." And she said, "No, you are blessing me." When the man's digging slowed, it dawned on her that he was crying too. She asked if he was all right, and he said, "No, ma'am. I'm just so worried. It might have been my grandfather who helped to lynch this man." They sat there together, weeping, their tears falling into the soil, into the hole they had made in the ground, now made holy by the exchange. When they had finished filling the jar, they took photographs of each other holding it. Then the white man got into his truck and followed the black woman's car to the museum in Montgomery, and they delivered the soil together. She had not gone looking for hope. Neither had he. But God, it turns out, had something else in mind. "Why do you look for the living among the dead?" the angel asks. Because there are times when that's exactly where you find new life dawning, where you can see more clearly how you are a resurrection in progress, how you are being changed, how you are still becoming. Seeing that can be enough to change our lives. Amen.